Hi, thank you for watching my channel today. My name's Sarah and my channel is called Your True Shelf, and today I'm doing my wrap up for the month of February. So in February I read 6 books, so I'll just dive right in and tell you what they were. So the first one that I read was one that I got from the library app called Libby, and this was Eat Up by Ruby Tandoh. And the reason that I ordered this book was because one of the squares for the Reading Women Challenge is a book about food, so that's what I used. So Ruby Tandoh is a previous winner of the Great British Bake Off, and I always really liked her on the programme. And the book, well, there were parts of the book that I really enjoyed, and overall I was a bit disappointed, but I think part of the problem might be that it was because I read it on the iPad, and I just don't really like reading books on electronic devices. It makes me want to get through them more quickly because I want to get back to a paper book. And so I think, like, in all fairness to the book, I think it would have had an extra star if, I think I gave it 3 stars. I might have given it 4, I can't really remember now, but if it had been in paper form I think I would have given it more. Anyhow, so it's basically talking about food in lots of different ways. So it talks about it as a cultural thing, it talks about it as emotionally, it talks about God, it's really hard. I always read these books by the beginning of the month and I find it hard to remember everything about it. It's got some recipes, it talks about food growing up, it's very diverse, like it talks about food and sexuality and gender and race and culture and lots of things like that, which was really interesting to read about. The best bits of the book for me was how she describes the food. So like how she will describe like butter melting, or she'll describe like what it feels like when you eat a certain thing, or what it smells like when you're cooking a certain thing, and she's really good at doing the descriptions of the food, which made me, like, I have to say, eat more. And oh yeah, there's also stuff about like weight and size, and so she's been really inclusive in her writing, and she's done brilliant descriptions of the food. Sometimes I got a little bit bored with some of the chapters, and she kept using the word bougie, and that really annoyed me because, like, I think it's okay to use it once or maybe twice, but she used it like 4 or 5 times, and every time she said it was annoying. But anyhow, so I'd recommend it still. It's a really good one for that square if you're doing the Reading Women Challenge, but I didn't love it as much as I hoped I would. So that was the first one. The second one was called Here I Am by Patti Kim. This one was also for the Reading Women's Challenge, and this was a picture book. So there actually weren't any words in this book at all. Patti Kim is from South Korea, and this book was about her journey from South Korea to America as a child, like her journey as an immigrant in America. And it was about how she felt initially and how she managed to settle in and make friends and things. And I read it with my daughter, and so that was, the challenge was a picture book, so it's specifically a children's picture book and not a graphic novel. I wouldn't normally count these as books I've read because I literally read a picture book every day with my kids at bedtime, so if I counted all those then I'd read like 400 books a year or something. So I don't count those obviously, but I am counting it this month just because I did it for the challenge. I enjoyed it. I thought the illustrations were really great, and I thought that it was good to read it with my daughter because I could explain to her sort of what it's like for some children and have to leave the place where they were born and go to a different place, and they don't speak the language and they don't read the signs, and they can't, they find all these barriers that they have to overcome. So it was good to have it as a discussion with her. The next one that I read was one that I could use as one of my own goals for the year. So one of the authors that I really wanted to read last year and I didn't get round to, so I covered it over to this year, is Sarah Moss. And I finally read my first Sarah Moss. So I read Ghost Wall, which was at the library, and it got huge press on BookTube last year and the year before, I think, or at the beginning of last year if not. And I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. It's a very little book, and it's basically about a girl whose name escapes me, but her and her mum and her dad have gone to spend the summer at a recreation of the Iron Age, and the dad is a bus driver and he's really interested in history, and he has asked the university professor who's running the trip for his archaeology students whether they can participate and he can help. And he's clearly got like an inferiority complex about being with this professor, because he's constantly trying to kind of keep up with the professor and outwit him, and he's got a real sort of chip on his shoulder. And he's very, very strict and controlling, and he is physically abusive to his daughter and his wife. So they're sort of living in fear of what he's going to say and do all the time. And the students are starting to realise what's going on in this relationship. And right at the beginning of the book, it starts with a sort of like death ceremony where someone's going to be either punished or sacrificed. And we don't know, because it's the preface, we don't know whether that's something that's happened in the past or something that's happening on this trip. And it basically follows the summer over this camp. So I thought the writing was great. I really enjoyed the story. I thought it packed quite a lot into a small book. I really felt like the conditions, the heat, the thirst, the sunburn, the fear of the dad, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to reading some more Sarah Moss. The next one I read was, well, it was an audiobook and it was a re-listen for me, and it was Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. This is an absolute gem. Like, if you haven't read this or listened to this, please do, because it's so, so good. I wanted to listen to it again, number one, because I really loved it and I don't reread enough. Number two, because I want to read A God in Ruins soon, which is a companion piece to Life After Life, and I wanted to listen to Life After Life again to refresh my memory. Excuse me. So, Life After Life is following a girl called Ursula, and she's born in 1910 on a snowy day. And at various stages in her life, she dies and she comes back to the beginning of her life again. So, for instance, the first time she dies, it's in childbirth, and the cord is wrapped around her neck and the doctor doesn't get there in time because of the snow. And she dies in birth, like I said. And then it will go back to snow again, and then she'll live a bit longer next time. And then the next time she dies, it goes back to snow, 1910 again, and it goes through, so she gets older and older. And each time that she lives, she starts getting a bit of deja vu of a situation which might have happened before. Like, for instance, she might remember that if she goes down the lane to look for her brother's ball, something bad might happen because it did in a previous life. And so she gets this kind of feeling of dread, and she then decides that she's going to do something different, and her life takes on a different direction. So it's just like, it's just so good. And she lives with her parents, and she has 4 siblings, and it's really, the relationships between the siblings are great as well. Like, I loved her brothers and sisters, and one of her brothers, called Teddy, is the subject of A God in Ruins. I loved her dad. You hear about like their friendships, her relationships, and it's just so interesting how small decisions in her life lead up to very different outcomes. Like, sometimes she has a life which is really sad, and sometimes she has a life which is really joyful, and it's only small things which change. And she's also considered a bit odd because of this deja vu, and she has to go and see a psychiatrist called Dr. Kellett, who's so lovely. And so, as you can probably tell from my ramblings, I absolutely am in love with this book. I've moved it onto my favourite books of all time list, which I have on Goodreads, and I loved it so much. So yeah, I can't recommend it enough. Definitely 5 stars, really 6 stars if I could do such a thing. And then the last 2 are ones I've got here. So the next one that I read was, I finished this one, which is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. So I finished, so I read the first, like, actually Little Women before Christmas. Then I stopped, and then I read Good Wives, which is included in this as well, after Christmas, well, this month. This Good Wives for me wasn't as good as Little Women. So Little Women stops at the point where Meg's getting married, and Good Wives goes up to the point where the girls are all probably late 20s to 30, and they're not all together anymore, so you don't get the same like sort of playfulness and interaction between the girls. And because they're all on their own journeys, they aren't as fun and interesting, I don't think, as when they were all together. And I didn't enjoy all of the girls' stories. I won't give any spoilers because obviously if you haven't read it and you haven't seen the film, you won't want to know what happens. But this actually put me into a slump, I'm sorry to say. So overall, I did give it 4 stars, but it just took me really, it's a long read. The writing's quite heavy. Well, it's not heavy, but you can't, like, each page probably took me 2 or 3 minutes to read, so it was a slow read. And I'm pleased to say I'm out of my slump now, but I was glad to finish it, put it that way. And then the final one, which I just finished yesterday or the day before yesterday, is this one. This is called Veronica Decides to Die by Paulo Coelho. Now he was another one of my authors that I put on my resolutions to read this year, so that's another one ticked off, so that's good. This book is one of the ones which I mentioned in my last video of all the books that I've been lent, and I've left them out to prompt me to read them. And my friend Shona lent this to me years ago, and I finally got around to reading it now. And it was a 3-star read. The premise is that this girl called Veronica is in Slovenia, and she basically just feels like she's a librarian. She said she's not happy, she's not sad, she just doesn't really feel much. She's like kind of bored of her life and living where she lives. She sort of feels a bit fed up that nobody actually knows where Slovenia is, and she decides that she's had enough and she's just going to take an overdose of sleeping pills. So she takes an overdose. This is right at the beginning of the book, so it's not a spoiler. She takes an overdose. Then, well, after she's done it, she just thinks, well, now what do I do until I die? Because she doesn't know how long it's going to take. So she starts reading this like article in a magazine about IT, and then it starts with saying, who knows where Slovenia is anyway? So she writes a response to this article, and then the author writes himself into the start of the story, which is a little bit strange. And then she wakes up and she's in hospital, and she basically gets told by the medical staff that her heart was damaged in the overdose, and that she's only got about 5 days to live. So that's the premise of the book, and she has to decide what she's going to do with these 5 days. Initially, she wants to try and procure more medicine to finish off the job, and then things start to happen and she sort of reconsiders. So it's an interesting concept, and there were some really interesting theories in this book. Like, for instance, the people who were in the mental hospital where she is, they because they're labelled as mad, even though a lot of them aren't really mentally unwell, because they're labelled as mad, they then feel that they don't have to conform to the normal rules of society anymore. So if they want to say something which could be considered rude, or like that you normally keep to yourself, they just say it, or they think, well, I'm just going to do this thing, or they become more disinhibited because they like feel, well, there's no consequences, I'm mad, so I can do what I want and justify it. And they're not doing it in a selfish way, they're just doing it in like a way where they come out of themselves a bit more. And then there's kind of discussion about, is it them that's mad and the rest of the world is normal, or is it the other way around, and they're actually being sort of more normal and the rest of the world is mad? There's kind of discussions like that, and there's discussions about like the sanctity of life and stuff like that, which was all interesting, but it kind of felt like a fable. It didn't really feel too much like a page turner or like a proper story. It felt more like a fable with a moral stance throughout the whole book, and that sort of took away some of the enjoyment for me, because it sort of led you as this is what you should think when you read this book. And I don't know, they're also like some of the patients in the hospital, it will then take a tangent and talk about their life and why they ended up there, and I didn't really like those bits. I wanted to hear more just about Veronica. So it's only a little book. It's about 190 pages. I gave it 3 stars, and yeah, it's one I can return to its owner now. So they were the books that I read in the month of February. Let me know if you've read any of those books, and if you have, what you thought of them. If you haven't, let me know if you'd like to pick any of them up now that you've heard me talk about them. And I will speak to you all very soon. Bye.